According to data collected by the Zippia Group, the American pharmaceutical industry grossed $424 billion last year and controlled nearly 50% of the global market, accounting for 48% of all spending worldwide. Despite this, everyday Americans like you and me still struggle to fill their prescriptions. I've always found that the pharmaceutical industry was overcomplicated and not quite beneficial to the general public. So after doing a lot more research and getting some numbers behind the industry, I feel I'm qualified to give you a closer look at this market. Americans pay overwhelmingly more than any other developed nation for their prescriptions, and the reason behind this is due to the fact that the pharmaceutical market in the US is more or less completely unregulated. So today we're going to give you some information about how the pharmaceutical industry affects everyday Americans, some possible models for how we could regulate this market, and then we'll take a closer look at one proposed solution that's currently being debated in Congress. So let's begin by looking at how this affects the everyday guys like us. According to the RAND Corporation, Americans pay nearly 2.6 times more for prescriptions than the other 32 developed nations that were surveyed. And when it comes to name brand drugs, these are drugs that are patented with no generic alternatives. That number jumps up to almost 3.5%. Sorry, 3.5 times higher. The reason behind this is the fact that in America, the drug companies themselves set the prices, and they do it pretty much at their own whim. So when a company like Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson comes up with a cure for something, they look at their own internal costs for research and development, manufacturing, and all that, and they say, this costs us this much, we're going to sell it to the public for this amount, and there's no changing that. There's not even a system in place to see how they're pricing things internally, so they just pick a price and the consumer is stuck with it. And these artificially created prices are having real consequences on everyday people. According to a survey from the Kaiser Family Foundation, 25% of the people who responded say that they have trouble regularly keeping up with their prescriptions. And even scarier, 3 in 10 reported they weren't taking their drugs as prescribed in order to save money. So this means they're either not refilling prescriptions when they should be, or they're skipping doses or cutting doses in half in order to ration them out longer. And this has, serious, sometimes even life-threatening consequences. So clearly the free market system isn't working, but what are some ways that we could step in and regulate this? It's currently 100% illegal for the government to step in and negotiate with manufacturers on price. This was set up in order to protect the free market and keep the government out of a private industry, but it's clear that this isn't working for anyone, and the American people know it. According to that same survey from the Kaiser Family Foundation, 83% of people were in favor of Medicare stepping in and negotiating prescription prices on behalf of the public. A similar survey from the Robert Woods Foundation found that 89% of people are in favor of putting price caps on life-saving drugs, and 86% were in favor of preventing pharmaceutical companies from blocking cheaper generic alternatives. So clearly the support's there, the people want a change, they want regulation, but what would that actually look like? There's currently 2 models for how the market could be regulated. There are price controls, and there's models that reduce copays. Price controls are when the government steps in to the manufacturers and says you're not allowed to charge over this amount for a certain drug or treatment. And reduced copay systems work exactly the opposite, where the government steps in to the individual and says, okay, you won't have to pay more than this amount out of pocket for a certain treatment or prescription. So now that you've seen both general models, let's take a look at one solution that's currently being debated. The drug price negotiation plan is currently up for debate in Washington, and according to the Center for American Progress, this would take 3 major steps towards regulating the market. First, and most importantly, it would require the Secretary for Health and Human Services to take a look at the 10 most expensive drugs on the market in any given year, and then work directly with manufacturers in order to reduce the price of these drugs. This is huge because it would be the first time the government has ever stepped in to directly negotiate with manufacturers on behalf of the people, and it would set a precedent that would allow for future regulations and negotiations going forward. Additionally, this bill would cap low-income Medicare spending at $2,000 per month or per year. This means that millions of low-income families will have a set maximum for how much they would have to spend on healthcare, where the current system is there's no limit. You could qualify as low income and still be saddled with thousands of dollars of medical debt. And finally, the system would require drug companies to send rebates when their prices increase faster than the rate of inflation. And that's important to note because in last year alone, the price of prescriptions has gone up nearly twice as fast as the rate of inflation. So there's clearly some price gouging going on that would no longer be allowed through this program. So that's an overview of the drug price negotiation plan and how it would take steps to start regulating the currently untamed pharmaceutical market. In conclusion, Americans are paying far more than any other developed country in the world for our prescriptions. It's clear that the free market system isn't working for anyone but pharmaceutical companies, and it's time to make a change. And the drug price negotiation plan takes direct steps towards making that change. It could overnight provide relief for millions of Americans, and at the same time, it would take steps to directly hold the pharmaceutical industry accountable for the way that they price their products. So in conclusion, I encourage all of you, wherever you are, to go out and educate your friends and your family on this topic, and most importantly, go to your politicians, wherever you happen to be, encourage them to support this bill and other ones like it. Thanks for listening.